Fear of death. So you already came to know how this topic came up, because each time I am asked to talk on something or the other, I inquire whether people would be interested in that topic, and why not get something from them which I can prepare for the next time. So anyone with ideas of what they would like to hear, please give me that. I would be glad to share whatever I know about it. So this time it's the fear of death. Death is defined as an irreversible, permanent cessation of all functions in a living organism. It's irreversible, it is permanent, and it ceases. And this occurs in a living organism or something which is alive. So this connection to life makes defining death as difficult or as complicated as defining life. It's not so simple to define life. Just try to define life for yourself and see what happens. You really can't define it, and so is death. The other link of death is to birth. Birth is again a complicated process, and it does not make it any easier to define either. If you notice, I have been calling them processes because birth is a process where life gets into what you would call as inanimate substances and expresses itself as some function or the other. So is death a series of stoppage of these functions? Is that the process? I give an example. The heart starts beating around the 23rd day in the embryo in the mother's womb. So is death the stoppage of the heart and consequent circulation? Or the lungs may be working in the newborn or in the womb, but really starts functioning when the child is born, when the child takes the first breath. Air goes in, till then there is water or whatever, amniotic fluid. So is the stoppage of breathing death? And these sort of questions have been creating problems for both science and religion, who have tied themselves in knots over it. Slowly, a new definition has emerged, and not exactly new, but what the medical science uses. It's brain death. It's an accepted scientific and legal parameter to declare death. And who has to certify it? A qualified medical practitioner. This is a useful endpoint for many reasons. Most important is it helps in transplant of organs. It means that in an individual, some organ or the other, whether it's the kidney, the heart, the lung, or liver, or whatever, has given up the ghost and is dead. While in another person, the brain has died, but all these organs are still alive for some time. So this gives an opportunity to remove these organs from a brain dead person and donate it to another person whose only one organ has died. The rest of the things are functioning. So this is how transplant science came about and is going on. Recently, we heard in Bangalore about a lady, what's her name, who woke up when she was taken into the, almost being put into the grave, and the last rites were being done. She had been declared brain dead in the hospital, but the relatives took it as complete death, and when they took her to the to bury, they realized she is moving and she breathes occasionally, so they brought her back to the hospital. And not to the same one, because they didn't trust that hospital, they went to another one. But slowly, after brain death, the other organs also gave up, and she died again. This was Yasmin Banu at Kudus Sahib graveyard. So This sort of thing happens. Once brain death happens, the other organs also go away. Now, when you look at all this uh, talk on the request of Srimati Ramamani, she wanted me to talk about the mystery of death. Now, defining death itself is become a big mystery. Huh? It cannot be defined so easily except for legal purposes or for transplant purposes and so on. So we can keep the mystery at that and look at other things. There is a Japanese philosopher who has talked a lot about death, Haruki Murakami. He says death is not the opposite of life, but just a part of it. He says this death and life are just different parts of what goes on. So I'd like to thank Srimati Ramamani because this gives me a wider scope. Her question of mystery gives me a wider scope for discussion. I'll tell you why. Let's take a glimpse at what I mean by this. Suppose you take a butterfly. This butterfly starts as an egg. This egg becomes a larva. The larva changes into a pupa. The pupa changes into the imago or the adult butterfly. Does this mean that the egg has died and the larva came out? The larva has died and the pupa came out? The pupa has died and the adult has come out? Or what died and what came out? Is that life continuous or is there something there? In our context, in the human context, it is like asking, did my childhood die before I became an adolescent? Or is it still around? There are a lot of childish behaviors we do indulge in. Or did my adolescence die when I became an adult? And what died when I became a senior citizen? I don't know if anything died or what changes have happened. We might have stopped playing marbles or flying kites, except mentally. But this happens. So when you look at this philosophically, each moment marks the dying out of the previous one as it moves into the past. So only thing that is alive is the moment, and we are part of it. Now, getting down to practical aspects of death, fear of death is known as the strongest and commonest experience of the human being. It is observed as early as 5 years of age, and 5-year-olds have 5 major fears which they express. Death is one of them. This continues into adolescence, and the only way we can get over it, or those who get over it, are those who get an understanding of the biological aspects of life and death. That is why a study of biology is considered one of the important things in education, not necessarily in the schooling. People take up commerce, people take up engineering, all those things. But in schooling time, an idea or understanding of biology is considered an important thing. Paramahamsa Yogananda, the autobiography of a yogi person, Yogada Satsang, he says, fear of death is ridiculous. Since as long as you are not dead, you are alive. So what are you fearing? You are alive. And if you are dead, there's nothing more to worry about. So he says this happens, and on further probing, he has said, this is one of the, what you would call marks of enlightenment. That you are no longer afraid of death and life, all of these are the same. In fact, life and death are two sides of the same coin. The fear of death is the other side of the love of life and the survival instinct, which is the hallmark of any life. All life tries to survive. That is its hallmark. And this is the obverse of fear, love and fear, life and death. Arthur Schopenhauer said, mostly it is loss that teaches us the worth of things. So when we are likely to lose something, that is death, it makes us understand what is life. Does that mean that facing death or the fear of death is supposed to teach us about life. Yes. But do we learn? We don't. That is the problem. Psychologically, loss is the most difficult emotion that a human being faces, like death, and is known to pull out all stops to avoid loss. It's clearly seen in business affairs. Nobody wants to lose any money or this or that or whatever they are doing. And in most other endeavors of human life across material possessions, animal, human, pets, all these things people don't like to lose. I'll give you an example. See, recently, standing at the railway station, trying to fill up that reservation form, a youngster came and asked me for my pen to fill up the form. I asked him what he is doing. He said he's a student. And naturally, I thought, I mean, here are students who don't carry pens, which is a very common thing. And I gave the pen to him. There was an elderly gentleman behind me who told me, "Don't, why did you give the whole pen?" Held the cap in your hand and given the pen. Asked him why. What will I get with holding the cap? He says, no, he will not run away with your pen. So I said, let's be charitable. He's going to give it back. He says, even being charitable, that fellow might forget to give you the pen because once the cap is there, it's all pen will fill up the form and put it back in his. Manjunath, go on to mute. Manjunath,
Yes.
please put on mute. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was told that even the loss of that pen is my loss. I was supposed to, honor it and not give the whole pen to the individual. And this is a common thing. After that, I started noticing that whenever people ask for a people hold on to the cap and give the pen, whether it's a ball pen or whatever pen. So the dread of the loss of any object or anything is not only confined to what we love, it is also to what we hate. We don't like to lose something which we hate also. I have a friend who is one of, I mean, not one, there are many in this world, but who is a Trump hater. He didn't like him at all. And he used to find the earliest opportunity to castigate him about all sorts of things, say, this man is doing this bad, that bad, and all that. But as Trump lost the election, this man went into a depression. I asked him why. He says, no, I think he was right on some counts. And he started going back in history and trying to find out what are all the good things he did. I said, this is exactly what you said was not good. Now, this man was finding good things. And he says, I want to find these things because I want somebody to hate like that. So just look at yourself, look within, and we find that it's not only love objects we love that we hold on to, it's even things that we hate. Because that sort of gives us some standing as ourselves. So death or going away doesn't mean that we are willing to sustain the loss. Any loss is bad for us. Also, in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, they talk about the human tendency to move towards or away from, which means irrespective of the qualities of the object, idea, or abstract thing, the deciding factor is the belief of gain or loss. If we believe we are going to gain something out of something, we move towards it. If we believe that we are going to lose, we move away from it. This is a crucial way of how we develop our belief systems also. The concept of gain and loss. I remember an earlier talk I had given about sacrifice, and there was a lot of feedback from that, from people, phone calls. Then when they met me, they said, we never looked at it that way. I said, what are you sacrificing? There is no question of sacrifice. I sacrificed my whole life for my children. I sacrificed this. No, you are not sacrificed. You went for something bigger or something better. When you go for something bigger or better according to you, it is not a sacrifice. There's no question of sacrifice. We hardly sacrifice. We leave something which the world may consider as important, but for us, something bigger is there. We want our children to prosper. We want this, that, all that sort of things that makes us do that. In addition to this, about belief systems, there was a recent WhatsApp message which informed me that all women think the same about men. It's interesting. I do not want to antagonize the ladies on the show here, but his message was relevant. He says all women think the same about men, that their father is a hero, their son is a genius, and the husband is an idiot. So this is how the belief system goes, and they operate on it. I have deviated enough from the topic, so I'll get back to it. There are two major effects of the fear of death that we need to watch out for. Number one, a 2016 study showed that it brings out a lot of negative traits in the human being. When with the fear of death is there, it makes us a lot really negative, even when the context does not merit such a response. How did they do it? They just showed people some videos or movies in which possibilities of death were explored. Then the same participants were asked their reaction to certain things which they had talked about positively. They found their response now was emotional and violent. And though the situation was the same, and they were reminded of their earlier rational and balanced approaches, these people denied it. They said, no, I think this has to be done. Now, when exposed to either their own fear of death or other areas of death, the human being's negative traits come up quite a bit. Our recent experience in the COVID pandemic has shown us that people have cleared store shelves of even toilet paper. They have taken supplies enough for a few years or months or years in their fear reaction, apart from the food they have taken, food or foodstuffs. See, I mean, they wouldn't think of somebody else. In fact, my nephew is in Australia, seriously offered a workshop to his colleagues there, saying, I'll teach you the Indian way of using a mug of water. You fellows are clearing out the shelves. That is not the thing to be done. Now, this was seen among the poor also. It's not the well-off who use toilet paper. Among the poor, there is the NGOs who are distributing, here in Bangalore we have seen it, who are distributing material, foodstuffs and things like that, were holding it. Even if it's going to get spoiled, ready-made food given is hoarded, they would rather throw it out than share it with somebody. Now, I'm not saying everybody is like that, but the fear of death, especially in this COVID epidemic, caused people to do that. The opposite examples are plenty, where people went all out to help others and they deserve to be given kudos. These are the ones who moved away from the fear or fear reaction and moved towards the sense of humanity, the sense of brotherhood, and the sense of oneness in their actions. So this has been an important learning, that people do get negative and you have to move away from it if you have to remain positive. Number two, I told you two major effects. The second effect is the fear of death makes it difficult for us to process grief. We are familiar with violent reactions from family members. When somebody dies in a hospital, we hear so many times that the relatives came and vandalized the reception or this or that, or threw something, broke glasses and things like, that sort of thing. Brings out the negative, and they are not able to, the way they process grief is through violence. Even the government has threatened huge fines and jailing and so on. You can see it in every nursing home and hospital now, that board which says so many, these are the penalties and so on. This
again is seen in the COVID epidemic. We know that the diagnosis of cancer is like a death sentence. Anyone who has been exposed to cancer or has been given that diagnosis almost thinks that that's the end. Whatever treatment, etc., they may go through, but it is like a death sentence. The COVID epidemic was also like that. People thought if they get it, they're going to die. And they would do anything to not get it. Now, a lot of deaths occurred within families and between family members. And the interesting thing noticed was when one family member passed away or death happened, the other one who had a mild attack or not so bad and didn't merit death, those fellows just gave up. One of the major things the doctors were complaining was that we are wary of a patient who gives up on life. Even if there's nothing serious in him, they tend to go towards death. So this was seen recently also. This effect is seen also in the medical field and war zones. Been in the army, as she had said, and in the medical field, the so-called warriors who are exposed to death in large numbers either become callous. They are not bothered. Ho gaya, ye gaya, that sort of attitude they get. Or they go into what is called as succumbing to the trauma. They break down. They have burnouts. All these things happen. So there's either complete denial of that or succumbing to it. That is why in any war or even in this epidemic where the so-called warriors, COVID warriors are fighting, they are withdrawn for some time and another batch is put in on the front line. There's replacement with a fresh batch till the older ones recover and are fit enough to get back. Post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD is the fallout that many struggle through after the so-called war is over. We are in that phase now as far as this COVID epidemic goes. I am also part of many teams which are working with the mental health of people. Because though the epidemic is going away, the second wave, this, that, vaccines, all this is on, the fear still remains. So people are reacting, or the shift in problem is towards the mental side. NGOs, some government responses have already come in for mental and psychological care. And we do observe this in people. On the one hand, they get back into life with a vengeance. They are not wearing masks. They are going around as though there's nothing, they're back in business as usual. Or they are stuck in isolation with fear in their houses. Even now, I get patients who have not come out of their houses for past 9 or 10 months. In fact, I'll ask you a question. See, we know about the lockdown, what all we suffered and all that. And after that, this unlocking started. Can anyone tell me at what level of unlocking are we? Is it unlock 5, unlock 6? Huh? So it is like that. We are not clear because that fear is still holding on to us. And we are not aware. We just go about being protective of ourselves. It seems one such person who was confined to the house for a long time, for past 10 months, wanted to go out and see the world and inquired from his doctor what he should do. So the doctor gave the advice which is going around now. Wear a mask, wear gloves, maintain physical distance in the social setup, and use sanitizers. Carry one small thing with you. Whenever you touch something or whatever, use a sanitizer. So this fellow came out with all this equipped well. And he came back and reported back to the doctor. He said he is surprised that everybody is wearing clothes because he was so rattled with this information that he thought just wearing mask, gloves, carrying sanitizer and maintaining physical distance was all that was needed. We have not only had
a negative effect, but we have forgotten many social norms, graces, and so on. This could only mean that fear generates more fear and irrational thoughts and behavior rather than teach us to appreciate life. As adjustment to the so-called new normal, I did talk earlier on new normal, we try to incorporate many aspects of the old without evaluating its need or utility. We are not really moving into the future well guarded, well protected. We are doing it with our emotional baggage from the past, which we think would be good for us. As one Vec commented, we are now caught in the mindset of an impending Zoom. We are so used to the Zoom that we are more caught in that Zoom rather than what actually is happening in life. I'll slow down here. Any one of you who would like to share, ask a question, something about their experience for a couple of minutes, you're welcome. You can either put it on chat, Vasu and they will take care.
Sir, this is Dr. Venkatachalapati.
Yes.
I told that people of fear of cancer,
Yeah.
people have the fear of cancer.
Yeah.
But nowadays, doctor says the stages of cancer. So it is first 2 stages, nothing to worry, you can survive. If it goes for a 3rd or 4th stage, even then it's not going to be harm you. It's only, as you are telling, as a psychosomatic, they will have fear and they will have the fear of death.
Yeah.
That's what doctors say.
Yeah. You're
But
right, sir.
it's not a fear of death.
No. The doctors don't have a fear. They are grading it, they are putting it 1, 2, 3, 4 and all that. But the patient really does not understand many of these things. If he is told, he's either okay or not okay.
Because
Yes or
they
no.
feel there are some neighbors or family history, they have died due to cancer. That makes them fear of death.
Correct. That's exactly. And they move into that direction also, even if there is no need to, go in for too much of investigation, treatment, this, that, they move in that direction. Yeah. Thank you, sir. It is true. It is same in COVID also.
Doctor, this is Malti here.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that for the last 10 months, there seems to be not only fear, it has developed into a kind of a phobia. So where people think that even, if somebody sneezes once or just clears their throat, it is definitely the start of COVID, and definitely that is, they have to be hospitalized and they're going to infect everybody in the house, and this works on them, and I think it brings about a lot of stress also for the people around.
Yeah.
Besides just being a fear, it turns into a terrible phobia.
No, anxiety, fear, phobia are the 3 levels of that negative emotion. Yes, but what happens is, one thing which COVID has brought on to us, we are not the only sufferers. We are likely to spread the suffering to others. So the individual should be careful. Yes, wear your mask, do whatever. But the society becomes extra careful and looks, in a wrong way at people, anyone who sneezes, coughs, or does any such thing. So there is a social aspect to it, which one needs to consider. People say, they are allergic. Now with construction industry starting over, right now in front of my house itself, road construction is going on. The ditches are being, the drainages are being cleared and so on. And people who are allergic to dust and such things, they do sneeze, they do cough. Now it's very difficult for them to cough in public. They'll go back home and cough. So it is like that. That fear has put in so much of caution in everybody that even a normal thing is considered abnormal. Yes, madam, you're right.
I am Janaki Ram.
Yeah,
When my father died in 1974,
yeah,
at the age of 74 years,
Yeah.
because he was born in 1900, he made one statement: afterlife is true. And our scriptures also teach about that.
yeah,
And our scriptures say this life is transient and like a dream, and the real life comes after death. So, what are your views and experiences from people who are dying on that?
I'll come to that now because I was so far on a different tack. I'm coming to that. You're one step ahead of me, sir. I'll come to that now. Yeah.
Because of what he
one more
said,
thing I want to share.
particularly he said that, and twice he repeated true.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
And that is the reason I said
No,
that,
that is
because he didn't have the fear. He said afterlife is true.
Now, many people have experienced. I also gone through an experience during an accident of what you would call as out-of-body experience. Once a person goes through that, their viewpoints about many things in life change because you seem to have experienced death and come back. Though you have not died, it is you have been out of the body and come back. So many times prior to death, they say a person gets enlightened. Enlightenment is for a human life. Manava Janma is a sure thing by the time we die or just before it. But it's, like you are going to die in a few moments and suddenly you get enlightened. You can't enjoy that. You are going away. So people try for enlightenment earlier than that. Yes, sir, you're right in what you said.
Sir, I want to share one more thing, sir. Can I?
No, yeah.
See,
Briefly,
when the
please.
corona started, the social media has highlighted so much, telling so many things from outside India and other countries. They made for this phobia into the people because people were not knowing what is that corona and that one. That in the beginning it was very much people are fear of the disease. Sir. That's what we have noticed in the beginning of the corona. After as the days receded, then that fear has come down, sir. Now about the vaccine is also same thing because it has some new thing. People think if you take the vaccine, anaphylactic reactions or some reactions are there. They doesn't want to take the fear, and also they are telling some aspirin allergy or aspirin causes some death or hematomas. So our elder people doesn't want to go and take the vaccines.
That is true.
That is the negative point they have easily created by seeing the paper as well as in the TVs. So that's how the fear has come.
I know. Yeah.
Doctor, there are two
I saw
questions.
them. Yeah. One person, Gopal MR, about son getting cured of cancer. Another colleague who went away. And though Vishwanath Kaushik, that when many of us know that death is for sure to happen to all of us, you are all one step ahead of me. So can you, if you permit me, I'll continue my talk, and maybe most of these questions will be answered. Is that okay?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah. Okay. So shall I continue? I'll continue.
Please do.
Yeah. So continuing, children are afraid of death. As a pediatrician, I can tell you that because of their active survival instinct. Life likes to go on. So it is an instinct initially, then becomes an intelligence, then becomes an intuition. That you know that you are going is an intuition you get later, but intelligence tell you certain things. Initially, we operate with instinct. Children operate with instinct, and they are curious about it. So this phenomenon I saw with my own daughter. My neighbor passed away with a heart attack, and she wanted to know where uncle went. So after a few days, I didn't want her to. She was 3-year-old. So I took her to their house and showed her that uncle is now in that photograph. So as a doctor, I get these phone calls and all, some terminal stage, and I come back and say that person is going or gone. Let me go there. So when I was saying such a thing, she wanted to come along with me. I asked her why. It's not a place where a small child goes, so don't come. She said, no, I want to see how they go into that photograph. She was curious, not about, she thought death is you, from a live person, they get into that photograph and are put on the wall over there. And they are not to be seen again. So she wanted to know how that happens. So children are curious. Adolescents try to face this curiosity and experience the thrill of courting death because they want experience. They are not just thinking about something. So we see these adolescents indulging in extreme sport, bungee jumping, wheeling around now on their bikes, doing all these so-called adventure sports. And they, though precautions and other things are mandatory and are taken, what happens is they court death and get the thrill of facing it. Adults are the most scared because they already have seen many, they have got what you would call as responsibilities of life, and they are busy keeping at bay the causes of death with either medicine, some precautions, insurance, and so on and so forth. It's only the aged who accept this as an inevitable part of life. Though everybody knows that we are going to go, it is the aged who start accepting it. Most probably because they are already nearing it or feel that they do not need any more experiences in life. They have experienced enough. They have seen good, bad, and the ugly, and gone through all sorts of problems and this and that. And in fact, they are the ones who would be what you would call right persons to talk about it. Now, really, they get into religion. Religion offers relief. Vishwanath, can you mute your this thing? There is some noise coming.
Okay.
Yeah. Religion offers relief in tackling the fear of death in its bid to regulate human life in the social realm. Because they promise something in the hereafter. They say, like, questions came up. Later on, you lead a good life now. Later on, you'll get heaven or hell or whatever, that sort of thing. The Semitic religions, that is Middle East, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and so on, operate on the premise of Judgment Day that weighs all the goods and bads you did, how you conducted your life here, and grant you the prize of heaven or the punishment of hell. There are a lot of stories and jokes and everything about it. The Indic religions, that is Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, which we are familiar here, offer solace of rebirth. They say one can rectify the mistakes of the past when you get born again, and also you need to suffer the consequences of whatever you did in your previous birth, whatever karma or things like that. So when this happens, and when you have added enough good behavior in your account, you go in for moksha or liberation from the cycle of birth and death. That is what even Buddha says, get out of this. So strong religiosity is known to create a greater fear of death. This is interesting because when people become very religious, they believe a lot of things which may not be related to the spiritual or afterlife, which are more related to current life. While spiritual pursuit with minimal religious elements reduces fear. You would have noticed a lot of people, I mean, this is a general trend, religion is being sidelined and people try to pursue spirituality more as a sort of fence to prevent the fear of death coming to them. It is also known that good physical health diminishes fear of death. So maintaining good physical health, taking your BP tablets or sugar or this or that, diminishes the fear of death. And in our lives, we experience many dangerous or near-death situations. People who have gone through this have less fear of death because they have neared it. They know something that this is the possibility. people in high risk professions and also those who encounter death regularly, like health professionals, priests, undertakers, all these people have a diminished fear because they have seen it happening and found, nothing really happens and they just disappear from, like they go into the photographer frame. All this happens because they develop a philosophical outlook in their encounters with others' death. So when we come to the crux of the matter, it comes to what should we do to tackle the fear of death? It's okay, people do this, that, and all that, but what should we do? Khalil Gibran, the writer of that prophet, says, you would know the secret of death, but how shall you find it unless you seek it in the heart of life? He says you have to seek death in the heart of life. If you would indeed behold the spirit of death, open your heart wide unto the body of life. For life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. This is Khalil Gibran. I was reading about this death from various different authors and things like that. And one metaphor or simile caught my attention. I'll share it with you. See, the river starts as a small or many streams or rivulets. These merge, and as it comes down the hills or mountains, it is dancing, it is fast, it is very, what you would call joyous. But as it reaches the plains and nears the sea, where it is ultimately, that's the termination. Like it was born in the hills, it's going to the sea. It becomes slow. It starts meandering all over the place. It turns left and right and doesn't directly proceed to the sea. Otherwise, it could be a straight line from the hill to the sea. It meanders all over the place. Why? It says it is afraid to lose its identity. It is only after the end comes or when it merges with the sea, it realizes that I have become the ocean. I am no longer a stream, a rivulet, or the ocean. So this was given as a way of understanding death. That when you merge with the ultimate, you realize that this was just one life and that is everything. It is the same with life because this life is built on an identity which has the ego, and death is going to eliminate it. The spiritually enlightened who eliminate this ego delight in the joy of the vastness of consciousness that opens up to them. So what are the essentials of this? The first essential for us is acceptance. A developmental psychologist called Erik Erikson formulated the psychosocial theory and said that each human being progresses in their understanding of life. I'm not talking of death, of life, through a series of crises. The others' crisis may seem small to you, your own crises are big. Yet we progress through crisis till we reach a level which is called ego integrity. Ego integrity is when we come to terms with life and accept it. We say, yeah, this is my life. I cannot be the president of the United States or this or that. My life is just this and I'm going to retire or whatever. When you reach that ego integrity level, that is considered as acceptance. We think acceptance is accepting whatever, from our physical frailties to mental setup to living conditions and all that. This happens only when the ego accepts whatever it is. Ego is not a tool which has to be discarded if you look at it this way. It is a thing which helps you in acceptance. Elders who have attained this stage of ego integrity are believed to exhibit less of an influence of death fear or death anxiety. Another thing, Sigmund Freud, the father of all these things, believed that we cannot have the fear of death because we have never experienced it. He postulated that this fear of death is actually an expression of a deeper discomfort. And his theories have been overturned a lot because he relied a lot on sexual matters. The latest going is Viktor Frankl and other psychologists who say the deepest concern we have is for meaning and purpose in life. So even those who find a purpose in life, who see a meaning in their life, are less afraid of death. Many times older people say that I get some meaning when I take care of my grandchildren, or just keep something going, or do this or do that. And they get a meaning and purpose for doing that. They have less fear of death. That's called thanatophobia. Here I was reading Mark Twain on this, and his views are usually out of the box. He says, I was dead for billions of years till I was born. But I didn't find anything wrong with that death, and it doesn't have any effect on me. If you really look at it, we have been dead. We were born, and again we are going into that. It's like Garvapsi. We are going to go back to that. One of the most important things is attachments, acceptance, having what you would call a deeper concern being answered, then attachment. They say drop all attachments, minimalism, this, that, which is not really possible or difficult to do. But we can detach ourselves and observe what happens within ourselves. That is going internal. When that happens, attachments leave us or detachment starts happening. In this context, one of the questions which came, Nachiketa's story is very popular and known, where he forced Yama, the god of death, to give him the secret of life or death. And he stood there in front of his house and things like that. And what did he learn? There are 4 things he learned. He learned that the self is immortal, the self or the Atma or soul. It is not born, it does not die, it did not come out anything, it doesn't go anywhere. It is there. And we are that. Even if the body is destroyed, soul is not destroyed. Even if the mind is destroyed, and so on. Second thing he learned is the body, intelligence, senses are all tools. Consciousness is what rules over this. And the Lord of this is again the self, the Atma. The third lesson he says is that greater than this individual Atma or soul is the super consciousness, which is the Paramatma, the ultimate person. Once that is realized, death loses all its terrors. And the fourth thing he says is path to realization, though long and difficult, goes through this process where you find that the self is immortal, that all your attachments and body, etc., are ephemeral and they go away, and the self is again boss over there, and there is a bigger self which you have to realize. Understanding this leads to moksha. So fear of death goes when you are on a spiritual path, as Nachiketa demonstrates. I would like to look at it again from a scientific point of view, because there is a comprehensive viewpoint of the fear of death given by the theory which says we have the presence of existential angst in the human being. It means this, why are we here? Not just meaning and purpose, that the existence or pure existence itself creates certain pressures. And the basis of all our life is the denial of this. We deny that we are suffering from any of this. And when we deny it, this generates activity of life. All that we do is a consequence of what we deny. Many positive things we do. We go help others, we do this, we do a lot of good. It is because you are denying that existential angst within you. A lot of negative things we do, even that is related to this denial. But here we have a choice. What do we choose, the positive or the negative? So religion directs us towards the positive. Evolution directs us towards the positive. Why are we alive today and why are we able to sit and talk on a Zoom this thing? Because our forefathers or whoever did some good things. Charity, this, that we may say, but not that. They developed certain things for the humanity to evolve. And this existential angst and denial leads us towards that evolutionary path. Ultimately, all this is speculation. Okay. And we can solve the problem only when we meet our death, our individual death. There's a story from Osho's childhood which illustrates this. It seems as a 9-year-old, he had gone to a satsang and a pravachana by one leading Jain Muni. And that Jain Muni told everybody about the 7 levels of heaven on top and the 7 levels of hell below. And he gave gory details of each level. First level, you don't have food. Second level, you are starved or boiled in oil and this and that and all. And in the 7th hellhole, he said that you can't come out of it. You are permanently put there. Till 6th level, you can sort of recover and come back and in your rebirth do something good. So Osho, as a 9-year-old, asked him, how do you know about the 7th one? Because if you had gone there, you could not come out. And if anyone else has gone into the 7th hell, he won't have come out to tell you that this exists there or you can't come out of it. So how do you know? So that person was stunned, the speaker, eminent speaker. Then Osho tells him that when I cannot believe you on the 7th hell, how can I believe you on the others, whether it's your experience or anyone else's? So all this, in a way, is speculation. So if all life is a question of ghar wapsi, getting back to where we came from, why spoil the present moment with speculation? We need to look forward to our arrival there. For readers of Times of India, Saturday edition, that speaking tree, there's one Kuldeep Dhiman who talks of death is not an end. He is an author and researcher in Indian philosophy and on reincarnation. Plato's Republic has given where he talks about, in Plato's Republic, about a person who goes to that place where judgment day takes place and people are allotted heaven and hell. And this fellow is sent back as a messenger to convey to human beings, and Plato conveys it. Then there's a workshop on past life regression, many workshops from the leading master Brian Weiss. So that, if you can access the speaking tree of Times of India, Saturday, 30th Jan, there's a lot of material on this, which I have not covered in my talk, but it would be interesting for you to follow. So on this note, let us not spoil the present moment. Let us look forward to our arrival there, because it is said that the present moment is all that you have got. The past is dead. The future is not yet there. So shall we enjoy this present moment by coming to that present moment, coming to here, that present place, and now the present moment. Vasu or Vani, what should I do? Shall I do a here and now exercise?
Yes, sir.
Yeah?
That would be useful.
Yeah.
That will sort of round up the talk.
Yeah.
Is
Yes.
that okay? Yeah.
Yeah. Please.
Because I don't want to open up to questions right now. We'll do that exercise. So everybody sit back, sit comfortably. Please close your eyes. Take 2-3 deep breaths and leave them. As you take deep breaths, your abdomen should move, which brings about movement of the diaphragm, and your whole lungs clear out. You take in fresh air into the whole of the lungs and clear out all the cold air. After 2-3 deep breaths, come to normal breathing. Feel your breath going in and out. Along with it, feel your body from head to toe. Feel how it feels on top of the head, back of the head, ears, face, neck, shoulders,
down the upper limbs till the fingertips, down the body, upper body, lower body, abdomen and pelvis, lower limbs till the tips of the toes. Your mind is in contact with your breath and body, the Sthula Sharira. Listen to all sounds around you. You're, of course, listening to my voice. Any other sounds in the surroundings, please listen to them. Far away, nearby, loud, soft, all sounds. Feel taste in your mouth. May or may not be there. But that mind gets attached to the sense of taste. Then feel smell. You can feel smell only when you breathe in and out. So your sense of smell leads you to your breath again. Breath continues into body, head to toe, head, neck, shoulders, upper limbs till fingertips, upper body, lower limbs till the tips of the toes. Again, listen to sounds, taste, smell. Breath, body, sounds, taste, smell. As your mind links with the senses, feel the here and now moment. This is natural, this is neutral, devoid of connections from the past and the future. You are there and the present moment is there. That is the only truth which is available with us. Breath, body, sounds, taste, smell. Breath, body, sounds, taste, smell. As you go through this cycle, feel the calmness, feel the relaxation, feel the alignment to universal energies. Slowly open your eyes. You have used only 4 senses. Now use your 5th sense. As you open your eyes, link it to your breath going in and out. That links to your body from head to toe. So what you see links to breath and body. That links to sound, taste, smell. As all 5 senses are alive, you still feel that moment of here and now. As you are feeling this moment of here and now, the past moment has died and passed away. You are in a new moment. This continues into another new moment. And that is life. Death and life happen simultaneously. As the past moment goes away, the present moment comes alive. This dies, the next one comes. And you are experiencing it. That's the only truth available. Enjoy it. Open your eyes fully. And welcome to any sharing, any views, anything which you would like to express. Because I think I have completed my time here. I'll hand over to Vani and Vasu to continue.
Sir, I have listened to your near-death experience firsthand from you. If you feel that it is appropriate to share it here, I think it's very inspiring for all of us, but I leave the decision to you.
Yeah, I think I have completed, we have reached 7:40 something, no?
We have time.
Yeah.
If you would like, if you feel that it is appropriate to share, then
Yeah, yeah. Unless I don't know if Nuri would be interested in hearing. Anyway, I'll share it. What happened was I was in the army in Mizoram, going in a jeep on Krishna Janmashtami, 1980, Janmashtami day, and we were returning from Aizawl to our camp. There was a landslide. We got caught in that landslide. So we were 8 of us in that jeep. We got out of the jeep and pushed it through the landslide, came out on the other side. And after we came out, I told that driver, this whole hillock which we were passing through is unstable. So let us go fast. Just jaldi chalo, ruko mat. Got everybody in and continued. That driver was so rattled that the next curve he didn't take. He didn't take properly. And our jeep went down about 400 meters downhill, hit a ledge and tumbled and went into the river, which was another 400 meters down. Luckily, all of 8 of us in that jeep, it was army jeeps are open and there is that just canvas, that whole thing we thrown out of it. Only thing I remember at that moment was there was a small sort of door with a latch on my left, and there was one Chaudhary sitting next to me, between me and the driver. I held on to Chaudhary, opened that latch, and we both fell out. That much I remember. As I was falling out, we didn't know where we were going. It was a very slow motion thing going on. There's a lot of recollection of past and this happened. And all that I remember is Baba, Sai Baba, who said, hold on to him. I thought, hold on to that. Hold on, don't worry. And we fell among the trees. And after some time, we realized that hearing moans here and there and all, we realized most of them are here. The jeep, we heard a splash down there. A lot of material in the jeep went down. We were wondering what happened, and I started calling out the names. Chaudhary kahan hai? Fakhruddin kahan hai? Gurung. Arey Gurung, mera pair mein dard hai sahab. Acha, kidhar hai? And at that time, all that I was holding on was a bag, like a backpack, which was a medical kit. As a doctor, you had to carry one. So that was with me. And I got up, somehow struggled, called, no torch, no nothing in that, it had all gone. So in the darkness, it was around 8:30. By hearing the voices and all, went all over the place, talked to each one, found out there were broken legs, broken, clavicles, ribs, all these sort of things. Got them all together and found that my Batman, that Fakhruddin, youngster, was the only man who was injured but could move around quite comfortably. Even I had a difficulty. So I told him, Fakhru, ऊपर जाओ, ये landslide बाएं तरफ है, left है, go to the right. 4 kilometer नीचे वो camp है. Go there, get some help and all that, and made him climb the. And every 2 minutes, I say, hey, Fakhruddin किधर है? So अभी चढ़ रहा हूँ सब. Hey, I thought we have gone quite deep. I didn't know where it was. That was another time I felt, again, Baba telling me, do your job, leave it to me. Everything will be okay. And as we were falling, I remember holding a hand, which was not Chaudhary's, I was holding his back. Somebody holding my hand and sort of gently dropping me. I fell down, there was injury. I had packed up these 8 people, jeep came, all the vehicles came, we went to a hospital, all those things happened. After I reached there was one Dr. Shekhar. He looked at me and said, Arey, Tekor tera kya? We wrote down case sheets, we admitted those people, put splints, this, that, all those things were done. Then he said, Tera sir pe kya hua hai? What happens top of your head? So there was a cut there. So I told him, cut ho gaya hai. So he stitched that.
Then he told me, Sabka, everyone's x-rays and all done. You also lie down and have your x-ray done. So I lay down on the table and my head was turned to one side. So he straightened it out and took the x-ray and told that x-ray technician, वो सब का दिखाना, बाकी का देख लिया है, इनका दिखा देना. Then he went and he started writing my case sheet about that injury and all that. Then he told me, Tekor, when did you have lunch? I said, today we didn't have lunch. We had breakfast only. Lunch we were traveling and this happened at around 8. Now what is the time? He said around 12:30. So he said, Acha, kuch khayenge. Let's eat something. I also not had anything. And because 8 o'clock, messages went from that other camp 8:30 that this has happened, that is all that. So he had also not eaten. He said, let's eat. Utho, utho. I said, I can't get up. He said, kya ho gaya? Can't move my hands and legs. So he lifted my leg and dropped it, tuck. And then he said, don't move. X-ray aaya tak. When they took the X-ray, my neck bones 3, 4, 5 were broken. And he said, it is going to sit on the spine. You are in trouble. So just lie down there. I'll get that orthopedic man here. We'll put a Minerva jacket from head to chest and then we'll shift you. So this was the time. Every few minutes, I don't know what, I was writing case sheets, I was being helped. I was doing this, I was doing that, I was being helped. And all the time I knew that Baba was with me. So whatever it was a great experience. And after that, I have lost the fear of death. that is a secondary this thing. But it was a wonderful experience in the sense it was something which it's difficult to describe. It was something which really shook me up at one end and gave me a lot of confidence. And that is when in the hospital while lying down, paralyzed all 4 limbs, then as to go to the toilet, I could not. I called that nursing assistant, male nurses there. I told him, oh, is pe bithao. I told him to make me sit on the pot because they are trying to give me enema and this and that. I didn't like the idea. So I sat on the pot and that is the first time really I prayed to God. I said, Baba, I saw you. You came, you held my hand. Now for the rest of my life, you tell me what to do and I will do it. And I don't want to live like this with all 4 limbs paralyzed and not able to do anything. I was 28 that time. Now I am 68. It's 40 years. 1980. Yeah. So I said, I'll do whatever you want. Get me out of this or take me away. There's no point living a life like this. And that time I remember sitting on the pot, talking to God, and he told me, okay, I'll tell you what to do it. And straight away I could pass to this thing. Within 48 hours, sensations came out in my hands and legs. Though I was in hospital for about 6 weeks or so, some time, it was continuous improvement and remarkable improvement. People couldn't believe that I could improve so fast. Only residue I had out of that accident was hypertension, which is under control now. So those are the times I used to get glimpses of Baba. That's all. Some talk, something, and I could talk directly. I could talk directly to him. I held on to that and off and on it comes and goes. I'm able to do that. I don't know when and why. It is not under my control. It happens. So it's a very interesting experience, that near death, facing it, and then getting out of it. So, yeah, I hope that's okay, Vani, Vasu.
Yes, sir.
Most inspiring, sir. Very, very inspiring.
So it has come from your direct experience, even the talk, so that has more weight to what you have said. So it's not just from the books, but from your own real life experience.
I am doing what I am doing because of that.
You had told me you made a promise to God that you will.
I'll do whatever he wants me to do.
Yes.
And he guides me. Definitely. I have no doubts about it.